Welcome back to Learn Astrology with Mary. My name's Mary English. You can find me at www.maryenglish.com, maryenglish.co.uk and UK Astrologer. Hello, how are you? Now, as I said last week, I thought this week I'd cover the first time that a human being landed on the moon. So there were a lot of Apollo missions and a lot of training and money, etc., involved in the project. And then eventually it was Apollo 11 was decided to be the mission that made it to the moon and landed some human beings on there. So we're going to be looking at the takeoff. We're going to look at the launch, the landing on the moon, the first steps on the moon, and the splashdown, because we appear to have all the charts for that, all of them except one, I think, on astro.com, so they're already there on the Astro databank. And I thought this week we'd also cover the three astronauts. So last week I only covered one, but this week we're going to cover all three, because they actually, two of them actually walked on the moon, and we're going to talk about why one of them obviously didn't, because he was making the spacecraft continue to orbit and be able to bring them back up. I will put onto the show notes some YouTube videos if you want to watch the people concerned being interviewed now, none of whom are still alive, because this was a while ago. Now, the reason I wanted to cover it, the moon landing itself, is because there is a certain amount, or there was, I don't know if it still exists, a certain amount of, inverted commas, controversy about whether or not they actually did land on the moon, and it was And it's interesting how the planets, in the charts that I've created, it might be different if you use a different system, but my theory is because of the nature of the outer planets and where they were, and also the signs of the zodiac involved in this mission. Now, I'm not going to be comparing this mission to Apollo 10 or Apollo any other number. I'm just going to do Apollo 11. I haven't got enough brain power, and these are always short episodes. So we've got the date of the launch, which was a Wednesday, 16th of July 1969. The time was 9:32 a.m. in Cape Canaveral in Florida. So this is where the rocket launched from and the time. And I was happy to see that the ascending sign for it was once again Virgo, because as we talked about last week, the ascendant was Virgo when it took off, and also interestingly Virgo when it landed. So there's a lot of precision, there's a lot of needing to calculate things, and for them to be precise and perfect, that's all what Virgo is all about. Now, in the chart itself, we've got Pluto in Virgo, we've got Jupiter in Libra, conjunct Uranus in Libra, 0 degrees. So when this rocket took off, Jupiter, which is one of the planets that governs things like flying, okay, so if you think about, anyway, covers things like flying, and Uranus, which is definitely a planet that weird and wonderful and wacky stuff, the two of those are conjunct, and they're 0 degrees. So Jupiter is 0 degrees and 8 minutes, and Uranus is 0 degrees 32 minutes. Like, they're well and truly flipping well conjunct, and in equal house they're in the first house. I don't know that they're actually conjunct. Yeah, they're conjunct to Pluto, because Pluto's 22 degrees, so it's just within orb, 8 degrees orb. The other planets that are going on, we've got Neptune in Scorpio, which is retrograde. Now, as I mentioned last week, when the Artemis launched their project, that there were no retrograde planets, 0, 0, 0. But in this one, Neptune in Scorpio is retrograde. Now, if there ever was a planet that's going to govern things like not telling the truth, delusion, all the rest of it, you're going to blame Neptune. And in equal house, it turns up in the 3rd house. So there wasn't any controversy at the time for, when the mission started. Nobody disbelieved what they were doing. It was pretty evident because there was quite a lot of news coverage, and quite a lot of it was actually live. They did have in 1969 the ability to do live broadcasts. Mars is in Sagittarius in the 4th. The moon is in Leo in the 12th, and you'll see in a minute why that's important. 12. The Sun and Mercury are in Cancer in the 11th, and Venus is in Gemini in the 10th. Saturn's in Taurus in the 9th, and Chiron's in Aries in the 8th. There's nothing in the 7th. There's there's the North Node in Pisces, which actually I think that's where it is today. So that's the launch, and under Virgo, oh yes, nice, because that means we're going to be nicely and precisely. I think what we'll do next is the 3 people involved. So we'll have a little skip around their charts, and then we'll do the landing and then the first steps. So the 3 people concerned are Neil Armstrong, Michael Collins and Buzz Aldrin. Neil Armstrong was the first person that actually stepped onto the moon. So we're going to start with him because I've done it the opposite way. Let me do it the other way around. I want to do them alphabetical. I hate it when my Mac does that. We're going to do Buzz Aldrin first, so we're just going to do them alphabetically. So Buzz was born on the 20th of January 1930 at 2:17 p.m. in Glenridge in NJ, is that New Jersey, in the US. And he's got a Gemini ascendant. He's got Sun in Aquarius, Moon Libra, Mercury Aquarius, Venus Capricorn, Mars Capricorn, Jupiter Gemini, Saturn Capricorn, Uranus Aries, Neptune Virgo, Pluto Cancer. He's got pretty much a splash chart. He's got Moon in Libra in the 4th, and he's got Sun and Mercury's retrograde in the 8th house. Now, even though he's an Aquarius, the fact that he's an Aquarius, it's not going to be a difficulty for him to embrace something that's weird and unusual. I think, if I remember rightly, he was a fighter pilot before he trained to be an astronaut. And in one of the interviews, I think I've got the link for that, he talks about that after they'd landed and they'd got back to Earth, the president insisted that they went on a 40-something day tour of the world to 20-something different cities to talk about what they'd done. I don't really think he particularly enjoyed that. He didn't say he didn't, because he was obviously following orders. If you're working in the military, one of the things you have to learn first off is follow orders. But the Sun and Mercury are in the 8th. This is somebody who is very private, even though he has a Gemini ascendant. So I could quite understand why in the interview that I watched, he said he had a mental breakdown later on. He had to have psychiatric care, and he realised that he was anxious and the anxieties had manifested in some way. But that's because, not because he had to do the tour of the world, but because of the publicity that all 3 of them had to absorb after they got back down to Earth. So this is worse than being a rock star. This was attention, which they absolutely didn't have before they went, because they were in something equivalent to the military, and they just got on and did their jobs. But coming back afterwards, there was so much publicity which they couldn't avoid. So that's Buzz. Now, all of them are born in 1930. So next we've got Michael Collins. He's the one we don't have a time of birth for. He's born on the 31st of October 1930. Now, he's a sun sign Scorpio. So we've got one pilot or astronaut, astronaut who's got Sun in the 8th. Okay, now we've got another one who actually is a Scorpio, because the 8th house is equivalent sort of energy, and he's Sun, Mercury, Scorpio. The only thing he's got retrograde is his Uranus. He's got Moon in Aquarius. Okay, so he's going to be taking off and leaving the Earth, being in charge of the spaceship itself whilst they land on the moon. His job was to carry on orbiting and then eventually align his vehicle, whatever you call it, up with them when they take up off the moon again. So they had to synchronize those two things. There's been interviews with him. Did he feel lonely when he was on the other side of the moon? No, he didn't. He said it was lovely, it was quiet, he had time to think, etc. I don't think he disliked doing the job, but afterwards he didn't do anything further. He didn't carry on in NASA, and I think the reason he gave was afterwards that he'd missed his family. All of them said this, that the work was so intensive, it was long days, to go on a mission to the moon, and he missed his family, and he just sort of wanted a normal life afterwards. He didn't want to be in the public eye, etc., etc. It's really rare for a Scorpio to want to be, unless they've got some Leo planets. The only Leo planet he's got is Mars. So he's got Sun, Scorpio, Moon, Aquarius, Mercury, Scorpio, Venus, Saggy, Mars, Leo, Jupiter, Cancer, Saturn, Capricorn, Uranus, Aries, Neptune, Virgo, Pluto, Cancer. And his two retrograde planets are Uranus and Pluto. Don't know the time of day that he was born, so all we know is he definitely, well, yes, the aspect-wise he's got Moon, because I don't know what time of day he's born, possibly Moon opposition to Neptune. So I don't even think, it doesn't matter what time of day he was born, that's probably going to happen, because the moon's at 6 a.m. in Aquarius. And listening to his interviews, he didn't sound like somebody who'd got Moon in Pisces, I must say. He didn't sound like that at all. But there we go. So he's got Sun and Mars square, because Sun's in Scorpio and Mars is in Leo. Now we've got some repeating signs. So pilot number 3 is Neil Armstrong, also has a Gemini ascendant, the same as Buzz. Okay, both of them Gemini ascendant. And in Neil Armstrong's case, he was born Tuesday 5th of August 1930 at 0:31 a.m. in Wapakoneta, Ohio. OH, is that right? Ohio? Oh, gosh, don't check, I don't know. And that's in the US. So he's got Sun, Leo, Moon, Saggy, Mercury, Virgo, Venus, Virgo, Mars, Gemini, Jupiter, Cancer, Saturn, Capricorn, Uranus, Aries, Neptune, Virgo, Pluto, Cancer. They're all born in 1930. They all have Uranus, Neptune and Pluto in the same signs. And because now Neil had, because unfortunately I think I'm 100% sure they're all past, Mars in Gemini in the first, but his sun sign is in the third, the house of communication. He loved it with the interviews that he had. So in later life, I don't know whether he enjoyed them at the time, but in later life he was quite happy to be interviewed about it all. But look, he's got Mercury, Virgo, 1 degree. He's got Neptune, 2 degrees. These charts are on the show notes if you want to have a look at them, and all you need to do is go to astromary.libsyn, that's libsyn.com. All the charts are there. So if you've got Neptune and Mercury conjunct, you're going to be able to tell a story, and you got all of that in the third house. Ho ho, I thought that was rather fun. So because they've both, him and Buzz have both got the same ascendant, they've both got they've both got a Gemini ascendant. Both of them have Neptune in the third. I think that's the only planets that are in the same houses. Yes. So go back to Neil. He's got Moon in Saggy in the 7th. And as I say, it's the Sun, Mercury and Neptune are in the 3rd. Uranus is retrograde in the 11th. His retrograde planets are Saturn and Uranus. So he hasn't got vast about, only the 2. So with them being on board together, we've got the sign of Leo that is uniting them. We've also got Aquarius that links them, not links all three. Not all three of them have got Aquarius planets, but there's sort of like a link in between one and the other, and then the third one has got bits going on. But I say they've all got the same outer planets, so they're all going to have a similar, because they're all from the same generation, they're all born in the same year, so they are going to have similar attitudes towards the collective mindset, so to speak. They're going to not dress the same way, but they're going to have the same sort of, they're going to be living in the same sort of fashion era, so their clothing that they buy is going to be not the same but similar, the sort of films that are out at the time. So it's all those similarities when you've got Uranus, Neptune, Pluto in the same signs as other people. They're your generation, that type of thing, yeah? So we've definitely got one astronaut has definitely got Sun in the 8th, and the other one has Sun in the 3rd. So I think it was quite a good combo as well. And then because Michael never landed and walked on the moon, and in interviews he said he didn't want to, because he could have if he'd stayed in the Apollo missions, but because it was cyclical, and there was the next project or whatever would happen, so the next number, and then you'd be back on the rotor again, and he didn't want to wait for however long it might be for the chance to do that. He just wanted to break away from all of it, because I think by the sound of it, for all three of them, it had become a bit much at that point. And all of them have splash charts. All of them have got their planets all the way around the circle. Now, the chart of when the spaceship, the Apollo 11, lands on the moon. And Astro Databank is giving us 20th of July 1969 at 3:17 p.m. That's the date and time for Houston, Texas. And would you believe Scorpio is ascending and Neptune is right slap bang on the ascendant, and Neptune is now in Scorpio, which it was anyway when they took off. When they were born, Neptune was in Virgo, I think that's right. Yeah. So they're landing on the moon now. We've got Neptune retrograde in the sign of Scorpio. We've got Mars in Saggy in the first house. We've got Venus in the 7th, so that's quite nice, and it's in the sign of Gemini. Two of them have got Gemini ascendant. Venus is in the 7th. The two of them are landing on the moon. Remember, of course, that Michael doesn't make it. His job is to continue to orbit the moon. And now Pluto and Uranus, Jupiter and the moon are all in the 11th house of friendships, etc. And the sun is in the 9th. Sort of, there's actually not that many stressful aspects. The only thing that's causing us stress, I think, is Venus is squaring to Pluto, but everything else is quite cushy. Neptune is the only planet that is retrograding. Luckily they didn't do it during a Mercury retrograde. And at that moment in time, everything's forming a jolly nice trine, and there's a couple of bits of sextile going on. And so only one square, which is between Venus and Pluto. Venus is in the 7th. What have I missed? Saturn is not aspecting anything, and that's in the 6th. The North Node is in Pisces in the 5th, and Chiron retrograde is there in the sign of Aries. So the landing on the moon, the Neptune on the ascendant, I mean, it was otherworldly for them as well. And Scorpio is a sign you can't sort of miss, really. Some of them you can find interviews of what it actually was like for them to walk across the moon itself, which was very weird for them. Both of them said that they knew, you could tell that the moon was a smaller planet than the Earth, because you looked into the distance, the horizon was, inverted commas, much nearer than it would be if you were on the Earth, because it's a smaller planet, the moon. And they said, that the other thing they talked about was, because they were asked a lot in interviews, what did it feel like to actually be on the moon? And they made the point that they were so busy working, they didn't have the time to just sort of meditate and go, oh wow, this is fantastic. They had so much instruction coming to them from ground control. You've got to do this, you've got to do that, you've got to take this sample, you know, so the chance to be able to sort of have fun and enjoy themselves was really quite severely limited. They did remark upon the fact that the Earth was so far away, but I think an awful lot of interviewers, that was the thing that was annoying me a bit, interviewers do this, they put ideas into people's head, you know, what was it like for you to see the little blue Earth into the distance, rather than what was your experience of being in the spaceship, what was your experience of being on the moon, and leaving it as an open question. There was a hell of a lot of closed questioning, which was making me growl. But anyway, nice thing for the landing. So the spaceship, and if you watch the stories about it, he didn't want to land at the point that he was told to land at, because there were too many bumpy bits and he knew that all of the feet of the spacecraft wouldn't land. So he carried on moving. It nearly ran out of gas, but he carried on moving because it wasn't safe for him to land where they decided he wanted him to land, and he wasn't anywhere near it. So he spent a few more minutes going to a place that looked safer and flatter and not so bobbly, because yeah, for whatever reason, that's what he says he did. Now, I love the chart for the first steps on the moon. So we're 20th of July, 69, 9:56 p.m. 6 or 7 hours later, now having done all the things that I had to do, and the thing landed, and do all the recordings and check that everything was safe, etc., etc., they can now get out of the spacecraft and actually walk upon the moon. That's not like driving to the supermarket, park your car, get out. It's not like that. So there's all these things that they have to record all of the time. And I just was like, so when they landed on the moon, Scorpio was rising. It's now 6 to 7 hours later. UK time, you can't do time for the moon. Nobody's done that yet. And I haven't had an answer to the question that I asked last week. Now, I love this. Aquarius is rising. So that is the sign of freedom and weird and wacky things. So as he takes his first steps on the moon, which, trust me, everything is recorded. So everybody down on ground control is making notes and writing things down. And he makes his first steps, and the ascendant is 28 degrees Aquarius, which is as wacky can be. No planets there. The moon and Jupiter and Uranus are all, so Jupiter and Uranus are still conjunct, and they're now in the 8th house. So we've got a lot of this sort of 8th house Scorpio Aquarius energy going on. Neptune is now in a high point, but it's not going to be that on the moon. This is like for us here on Earth. What's it like for them to be up there? Neptune and Mars are conjunct, and they're up between the 10th and 9th houses. And the sun is now in 28 degrees, so the ascendant is 28 degrees and the sun is 28 degrees. Okay, so the sun is 28 degrees Cancer and the ascendant is 20 degrees. I'm sure if I was an Orion astrologer, I'd be getting excited about those numbers, but there we go. So he lands, and so this is Neil Armstrong making his first steps, one small step for man, one large leap, or whatever it is for mankind. He was asked about that. Had he prepared it? No, he didn't, but he was stepping down. He thought it would be a small step. It wasn't. It was quite a large leap that he had to make to get off the craft. But that was what went through his, and it was quite spontaneous, what he said. So I thought that was quite good for the Virgo Mercury conjunct Neptune, because he's forever being quoted for that little bit of poetry, really. So the actual quote is, "That's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind." And then, as I say, when they were interviewed us, but it wasn't like, oh, I'm just going to stand there and just going to absorb this moment. Then they had to go off and do stuff. They had to take samples, they had to walk about, they had to report back everything that they were doing. They were in radio contact, if I remember rightly. I'm sure they were in radio contact from the Earth's surface itself, because at some time later on, the American president, who was President Richard Nixon, had a telephone conversation with them while they were actually on the moon. And he said, "Hello, Neil and Buzz. I'm talking to you by telephone from the Oval Room at the White House. And this certainly has to be the most historic telephone call ever made from the White House. I just can't tell you how proud we all are of what you've done. And for every American, this has to be the proudest day of our lives. And for people all over the world, I'm sure that they too join with Americans in recognising what an immense feat this is. Because of what you've done, the heavens have become part of man's world, and as you talk to us from the sea of tranquility, it inspires us to redouble our efforts to bring peace and tranquility to earth. For one priceless moment in the whole history of man, all the people on this earth are truly one in their pride in what you've done, and one in our prayers that you will return safely to earth." So, Neil Armstrong, who's the only person that replies back to him, says, "Thank you, Mr. President. It's a great honour and privilege for us to be here representing not only the United States, but men of peaceable nations, men with an interest and a curiosity, and men with a vision for the future. It's an honour for us to be able to participate here today." President says, "Thank you very much, and all of us look forward to seeing you at the Hornet on Thursday." And Neil says, "Thank you, we look forward to that very much, sir." So it's not as if they had to have a long conversation. It's the shortest thing ever, but President Nixon manages to get a few points in there that obviously nobody's paying any attention to, and he certainly didn't. Peaceable, we'll see. But those are the sort of things you expect a president to say. But yeah, telephone call. I mean, at the time, it was the most amazing thing that somebody could be on the phone to someone on the, well, even now, that's an amazing thing for somebody to be on the telephone to somebody on the moon. It's like, whoa, that was a bit crazy. So that's him walking on the moon, first steps, Aquarius rising, moon, Neptune, Uranus in the 8th house, and sun 28 degrees in the 6th, the same 28 degrees as the ascendant of the moon, first steps, 28 degrees Aquarius, and the sun 28 degrees, that's the first steps upon the moon. So they take off on the 16th of July. They land on the 24th of July, 1969 at 6:50 a.m. And I've had to use Honolulu, Hawaii, because there's no coordinates for the middle of the sea that they splashed into. But it's going to be reasonably accurate. So when they splash down, and that is 8 days later, Leo is rising. Mercury and the sun are in Cancer. I think Mercury's 4 degrees Leo, and the sun is 1 degrees Leo. Yeah, okay. So they land, but the sun and Mercury are in the 12th. So splashdown, boom, Leo rising. It was the biggest thing ever. I mean, it was all over the news. Blah, blah, blah. And we got quite a lot of little stelliums. So there's the stellium that was happening while they were up there, which is Pluto, Uranus, Jupiter. There's another one, which is Neptune. They'd splashed down, and the moon now is conjunct to Neptune. Neptune is still retrograding. So the moon is now 29 degrees Scorpio in the 3rd house of communication. In the 4th house of home and roots, and Mars is there as well. And Saturn is up in the 9th, and Venus is in Gemini in the 11th. So with the Leo rising, and don't forget one of them, which is Neil, is actually a Leo. So he can sort of take a certain amount of Leo energy. But what they talked about afterwards, so even though they'd splashed down, they got rescued out of the sea, they got taken back to land, they had to be kept in confinement for X amount of days because they were worried that when they landed on the Earth, because they'd been up in the moon, they didn't know what pathogens there were on the moon, and there was a big worry that they could come back to Earth with some awful illness or like pathogen that could affect everybody else, a bit sort of like the pandemic-y type of thing, and then that would affect the whole of the world. So they kept them in isolation. So these men had been up to the moon, done their thing, done their jobs, get back home. They don't get to see their families and stuff. They're put into not solitary confinement, but they were kept in a place with some mice. And when you hear Michael Collins talking about, don't forget he's the Scorpio with Moon in Aquarius, they're kept in a room with mice in a cage, and if the mice died, then that meant that they came back with pathogens. So what are they going to do with them? Sterilize them? I don't know what they decided they were going to do with after. So Michael said that those mice were so important to him and for him. I didn't hear the story from the other two astronauts, but to be kept away from everybody and not be able to sort of go back into reality for an amount of time, and if the mice died, that was it. What then happens? So the splashdown, the only square is between the Sun and Saturn, and Mercury and Saturn. Everything else is nice trines and sextiles and conjunctions, etc., with those little sort of a stellium in the third, a stellium in the fourth, so a stellium in the second, and a stellium in the fourth. And they're back, and it's safe, and nothing major went wrong. Hurrah. Okay, so how did all the conspiracy thing happen? I'm not going to go into great detail because I don't really want to give the people involved in it airspace, but there was a bloke, I won't even say what his name is, and he was a sun sign Leo with Moon in Scorpio, and he was born in 1922, I think it was. Hold on, let me double check. Yeah, he was born in 1922, and it's a sun sign Leo with Moon in Scorpio. So when the moon landings were happening, as we know, Neptune was transiting through the sign of Scorpio. When he self-published his book saying that it was all a load of garbage, Uranus was in the sign of Scorpio. So this is someone who took advantage of outer planetary transits to activate his own problems with reality. So and he wasn't even an astronaut. He wasn't even someone that even worked for NASA, so he didn't have any understanding of it. And it's a bit weird to want to he self-published the book as well, and why he even got any traction I don't know, but I suppose people like to be scared and not believe things. Anyway, and the other thing is, because Neptune was retrograding, etc., so in the sign of Scorpio, that's one thing that we need to be clear about, you know, what is reality and what isn't reality. And yeah, you can have your conspiracy theories if you like, but you're being influenced by the person himself who wrote the book that tipped this all off, and people started saying it wasn't a real thing. What you're responding to is Neptune, so have a look and see where Neptune is in your chart, or have a look and see in your chart where the Scorpio bits are, because that's what needs to be altered. So I'm talking directly now to anybody that's into conspiracy theories. Always check your own Neptune and the Scorpio parts of your chart, and also your 8th house. Those are 3 things: Scorpio, Neptune, 8th house. You want to check whether or not you're into conspiracy theories. But because of quite a lot of this particular mission, there was Scorpio energy going on. There was also Aquarius energy going, but there was no planets in Aquarius while this was happening. And then they come back down to Earth with a Leo ascendant. I say it quite strained the 3 astronauts to be doing 40 something days, is more than a month of travelling all the way around the world to 20 different countries. Well, I'm sure they just wanted to go home and have dinner with their family. I'm sure they didn't want to be in aeroplanes, but they didn't have a choice because they were following orders. Now, the only one of the 3 that said he'd probably or would have wanted to have gone back was Neil Armstrong, being a Leo. he was quite happy to, if he'd been given the opportunity, which he wasn't, he could have, he would have enjoyed returning to the moon. He also, one of the interviews I was watching, he was also a little bit sort of like, he didn't consider that it was anything that he had done, that it was a team effort. He wasn't the marvellous person that everybody was saying that he was. I think found that bit hard, even with his Leo sun sign. But like a pop star, when you do something and the whole world is watching what you're up to and stuff, it can quite be an overwhelming thing. Yes, so there were some parts of it that he enjoyed it about. I think he ended up divorcing. I think it wrecked his marriage, and he found a bit of happiness later on, played golf, etc. And yeah, I think he quite enjoyed being interviewed by people about it all, because he wasn't going to get a chance to do it again. So today we've been talking about, very quickly, so please understand that I'm not going into any great depth here. It's just a little skip over because we were doing Artemis last week. I thought it'd be important just to cover the first time somebody actually stepped foot. And there were lots of other missions afterwards where more people actually got onto the surface of the moon and walked about, etc. I think in total there were more than 10 astronauts that did that, but don't quote me, you can check on Wikipedia. So it's just a little bit about first landings on the moon with the mission Apollo 11. Now, next week is all lined up, and we're going to cover a planetary aspect that I haven't covered. And the reason I haven't covered, it's taken me a long time to understand it. But we're going to do T-squares next week. So I'm now 60 flipping 6, and it's taken me an amount of time to finally comprehend what the flipping things are. So we're going to be covering T-squares next week, and we're going to be quoting from Tracy Marks's fabulous book Planetary Aspects from Conflict to Cooperation, and her original book on it was called How to Handle Your T-square. But we're going to be doing T-squares next week, so if you've got one, have a listen. If you haven't got one, you're going to learn all about it. So I hope you have a fab week, and I'll be back next week. Bye bye now.